Hey guys, so today we're going to be doing an LS400 1UZ VVT-i from a 98 to 2000 going into an IS200. It's plug and play using a manual gearbox. So let's get into it. Right, so as I said, this is going to be an LS400 1UZ VVT-i from 98 to 2000. It's going into a Lexus IS200 and it is using a manual gearbox, and this is a complete plug and play harness. So what we're going to do first of all is, as you can see, this is what we refer to as an adapted harness. So basically we've taken the original 1UZ VVT-i engine harness, we've completely stripped it down, cleaned everything, replaced what needs replacing, removed what needs removing, and added in whatever we need to add in to make it plug and play. So the first thing we're going to do is let's take a look at that process so you can see exactly what goes into making one of these engine harnesses.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame, there's no time, feel the pain, live the grind, I could change, in my mind, pick a lane, commit and climb, the only way to win it life. I never miss, that's fact, taking big swings, hand to the bat, put me in the ring, you'll go out in a bag, cause I sing what I mean and I bring it to the mad light. Ain't got time to kill, I got time to feel, I took the red pill, I know life's short so I wanna live real, but how's it supposed to feel? How's it supposed to feel? How's it supposed to feel? They wanna say my name, but they holding back. They wanna say they hate, but they know it's cap. I ain't play no games, I just do that's fact. And I don't feel no shame, it's a mood you lack. I go crazy, nah, but I ain't lazy. Track after track, I work on this shit daily. Pass me the jack, right as fuel, got me hazy. About to unpack all these things I've been chasing. I've got visions in my head, like memories after death. To be a legend instead of something you can forget. I'm living up every breath, I'd rather lead than be led. I'll fill the seats as I spread with every word that I've said.
Right, as you can see there, we strip everything down, build a whole bunch of new stuff, and obviously remove everything that needs removing. So what we're going to do today is the same format as what we normally do if you've seen any of our other videos. First of all, we're going to go through the layout. So we're going to take you from the ECU box all the way around the engine harness and show you where everything plugs in so you know exactly how it goes on your engine. Then what we're going to do is we're going to move to a testing, which is made up of two sections, one with the ignition on and one with the engine actually running. So without further ado, let's start here at the ECU box. And you can see your 1UZ VVT-i ECU goes straight into an IS200 ECU box. So again, no dramas there whatsoever. You then have your 6 ECU plugs. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Super straightforward. They're all different plugs, so you can't get them mixed up, and they go straight into the ECU. Then coming off here, we have our automatic transmission emulator device. So again, because this is running a manual gearbox, we need this device to mimic the automatic gearbox signals so the ECU does run correctly without the automatic gearbox. Okay. Then these three are basically what I refer to as the body plugs. That's not all body wires, but these go to our patch harness here, and this interfaces with the 2 ECU plugs from the IS200 that are left behind when you remove your IS200 engine. Moving along from there, we then have our body plugs, 3 of them. We've got a gray, a black, and a blue. Again, you can see they're all different connectors, so you can't get them in the wrong place, and obviously they're color coded, so again, super simple to get that right. Then you'll see here we have our MPX device. So again, this is converting the MPX data from the 1UZ to work with the IS200. So again, keeps all the dash and everything working for the beam network. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'm going to cut to a section so you can see what it looks like when everything is nicely in the box as it should be. Right, so there you go. You can see exactly what it looks like when everything's tucked away nicely. Okay, moving along from there, we then have our grommet, obviously, which slides into there, which you saw in the previous photograph, how it slides in there. Moving along there, the harness just runs over there, which in this case will be running along there towards the back of the engine over there. And that is coming straight through there down to the back here. And that is when we have our first plastic section, which is keeping everything nice and tidy harness-wise. Now, this is actually a 3UZ engine, so you'll see there's some mounting points that are missing for this piece of plastic at the back. Most importantly, this mounting point here, this mounting point here, you'll see the 3UZ has it over there, not over there, because the actual pipes for the coolant in the back are in different positions between a 1UZ and a 3UZ, okay? Then we have the final mounting point here, which is exactly the same between a 3UZ and a 1UZ. So again, when you come to fit this on your 1UZ engine, you're gonna have a bolt there, a bolt there, and a bolt there. Just because I'm using a 3UZ engine, they have a different water bridge, so these mounting points are missing. But obviously I don't need to worry about that, just for testing purposes on here. Okay. Right, so when we get to here, the first thing we're going to do is pop up here and make our way towards the front of the engine. So really nice and simple, just a small section until we get into the next piece of plastic, which is super simple. It's just 2 bolts there and there. Again, straightforward. Just bolt on there with a 10 socket. Then out of this plastic section over here, to make it nice and easy, it is really, really straightforward. But this first section that breaks out here goes to Injector 7 and Coil 7. So while I'm here, the way that you look at these engines is from the driver's position, so from the back of the engine. This is cylinder 1, 3, 5, and 7, the odd ones, and the other side is the even one, so it's 2, 4, 6, and 8, okay? So those are the cylinders. I'll go through them as we go through each connector, but just so you know exactly what we're looking at. Right, so that pops out over there. Then further along, we have another section here, which obviously goes to Injector 5 and Coil 5. Then at the front here, we have the last section that breaks out, and that is going to your cam sensor. Now on the 1 and 3UZ VVT-i, you'll notice you have 3 cam sensors. You have one at the front that we're going to get to in a minute, and you have one on each inlet cam. And that's obviously because the VVT-i on the 1 and 3UZ is on the inlet cam only, not on the exhaust cam. So these are measuring what the inlet cam is doing. So as the ECU commands whatever degree advance or retard of the cam, these are measuring that the actual cam itself is doing what the ECU is commanding it to do, okay? But that's the cam sensor, or the VVL sensor as they call it, because it's the left bank. Then we have Injector 3 and Coil 3. Then we move to the front here, and we've got 2 sections that pop out here. So we have a noise filter that plugs in there, and then we have our purge valve. So again, it's a little vacuum solenoid valve that's bolted on the top of the engine here, and that obviously gets connected in the IS200 to the vacuum that comes from the fuel tank. That comes up at the firewall there at the back, so you're going to connect that to that vacuum solenoid valve, and the vacuum solenoid valve then gets connected to the actual intake as well at the front there, okay? So that just plugs into there, all right? Then moving along to the front here, another breakout section over here, and that's going to go to Injector 1, Coil 1, and the oil control valve for the left bank. So that's what this thing is over here. It's called oil control valve, okay? Then moving along, we have a breakout section here before we disappear under the throttle, and that is then going to your TPS. So on a 1UZ VVT-i, the TPS is actually down there. Obviously, it's pointing downwards, so it's very difficult to get to. So what Toyota did is made a little sub harness that goes up to here, and then you plug the engine harness into there. So that just goes from there straight down there into the TPS, and I think you can probably actually see the connector there. It's right at the bottom of the TPS there. Okay. Also coming out of there is going to be your accelerator position sensor. So if you weren't aware, a 1UZ VVT-i, although it has a physical throttle cable that attaches onto here, this isn't actually connected to the throttle blade itself. You can see I can move this whole section and you can't hear anything. But when I get to the end, there you go. So it's literally just that last section. It hits there and then it actually starts moving the throttle blade. So basically what Toyota did was, the way the system works is you have this, which is a pedal position sensor with 2 signals. So you have a main and a secondary signal. On your TPS, exactly the same. You have a main and a secondary signal. This is the motor, the electric motor for the throttle, and this is the plug for the motor, and this has both the 2 wires to actually control the motor, but also 2 wires to control a clutch. So effectively what Toyota did, because it was the first generation of drive-by-wire, they built in an electronic clutch that could disengage the motor from the throttle blade itself. So if anything went wrong, the ECU could shut down the clutch, and that's a mechanical disconnect from that. So there's no way that the motor could then overrun and just open the throttle fully when you didn't want it to. Okay, so again, really, really nice and super simple. A lot of safeties built into that. Okay, so then the harness moves down underneath the throttle over here, and it breaks off just under here, and it goes to the front cam sensor. So again, this is the cam sensor that's reading the cam pulley in there. Okay, and that is where the engine is using for actual engine position. So what I mean by that is to be able to fire the injectors and coils fully sequential. So this just has a single tooth on the cam pulley, and that's what this one is reading there. So it tells the ECU what position in the 720-degree cycle the engine is actually in. Okay. Then moving down from there, again, these are not the standard clips, just ones that I have that are nice and easy to remove the harness, because I'm taking harnesses on and off all the time. But coming down here, just above here where your aircon pump would normally be, we have another breakout section here, and obviously this is some of the new sections that we've added in, because this wiring does not come standard on the actual engine harness for a 1UZ VVT-i. It is specifically an LS400, so obviously we add it in because we need to add it in for the harness to make it plug and play. So first of all, we have our AC connector. So this is going to plug directly into the AC pump. If you don't plan on using the AC pump, you can usually just tuck it down in through there and let it dangle down in there. Okay. Then coming down through here is the existing section, and that's going to your crank sensor. And then lastly, again, the new section that we've put in is going down, and that's going to be to your oil pressure switch. Now, as you're aware with the LS400, the oil filter is not like this. This is an LS430 one. The LS400 is actually pointing backwards. So this sensor is actually pointing backwards there. That's why it breaks out at the top here and not obviously down here like it would on LS430. Okay. Right, so that's this front section done. Again, super simple. Anything new that we've added in, we have labeled, so you know exactly where that goes. The rest of it obviously goes to the standard locations, which I've just gone through with you now. Right, so that's this side done. So let's pop back to the back of the engine harness here. And going down here at the bottom, a couple sections that pop out here, we have our earthing point. Now you'll notice I got a bolt in there. That's for a 3UZ. For a 1UZ, it uses the M12 bolt, M10 bolt in here. So 12 millimeter socket is what loosens that and tightens it up. On your 1UZ, you won't have a bolt in there and you won't have a bolt in there. So ignore that. You will only have this bolt over here, so you know exactly where it goes. Okay. Then we have our oxygen sensor or Lambda sensor, which is right down here at the bottom. So see if I can grab the connector there for you. There you go. Now, what I would say, very, very important, there is a metal shield that goes between the block. You see that bolt over there? That's one of the bolt holes for it. It's a metal shield that goes between the block and the exhaust. And that Lambda sensor connector goes behind the metal shield. So I would advise you, please do make sure that that metal shield goes back in, because it's protecting that connector from the exhaust. The Lambda sensors have the same power supply as your ECU. So if that connector drops onto the exhaust, melts, and the power and ground touch and short out, it'll basically cause the car to shut down, and it'll be incredibly difficult to find out exactly where that issue is. So again, please make sure that metal shield is put into place. Next up through there is another section that we've added in, which is obviously the gearbox plug. So again, we do make it unpluggable, so you can change gearboxes. In this case, they are using a J160. So we've got our reverse connector there. Let me see if I can get this out. And then we have our speed connector over there. Okay, so that's the gearbox one. So again, if the customer ever was to change their mind, they could just literally unplug this and we could make a harness for whatever gearbox they went on, whether it be an R154, BMW, etc., etc. Okay, right, so that's that section over there. Moving down from here, you're going to see this little wire coming up from this little piece of plastic there. That's popping up over there and going into the back over here. Okay, now this customer didn't send us this harness section that goes under the intake manifold. So basically his is already on his engine. But what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to show you a photo of what it should look like under there, just so that if you are doing this yourself, that you know exactly what you're looking for. So there you go, super simple. It just goes down there to the knock sensors and the starter motor solenoid. So again, super simple, but that comes out directly there and is going to plug into there. And then you have your main starter cable, and that goes directly to the positive of your battery. Okay, Doesn't go anywhere else, straight to the positive of the battery there. All right. Okay, so let's pop over to the other side now and we'll carry on with the rest of the harness over there. Right, so moving along here, you then have your second earthing point that breaks out over here and again goes to that bolt over there. Again, you're not going to have a bolt in there like I do. That's for a 3UZ. You're just going to have this bolt over there. Then moving along here, we come to the end of the plastic section and we start with the rest of the harness. First thing that comes out is going to be injector 8 and coil 8. Then moving further along, we then have the ACIS connector. So I do have a video, which I'll put a link down in the description below, that actually goes through the whole ACIS system, how it works, what it is, what it looks like in the actual intake manifold, etc. So if you want to know more information, just pop down and watch that video. Then we have injector 6 and coil 6. Then moving along there, the next breakout section, we have the cam sensor for the right inlet cam. We have injector 4 and we have coil 4. Okay, now obviously I've just got it mounted here with P-clamps to show you guys like what you can do. Just grab yourself some P-clamps and mount that on there. Super simple. You have 2 mounting points on the fuel rail here. Right, moving along, we then break out at the front over here. So we go to a couple of sections. Number 1 is going to be your coolant temperature sensor. That's that one over there. Remember, with the 1UZ VVT-i and the 3UZ, you don't have a temperature probe like I do there. I've added that in, so you just have like a blanking bolt there. So don't be confused if you don't see this there. That's what I've done. It's not standard. Then we go to injector 2 and coil 2. We also go to the oil control valve for the right bank, so that plugs directly in there. And then lastly, coming all the way up here, we then have our mass airflow meter. Okay. Now with mass airflow meters, obviously they can be different between different engines and different series. Sometimes the same engine, but in a different series, like a GS or an LS or an SC, they may have different mass airflow meters. The easiest way to figure out what your mass airflow should be is to take your ECU part number, stick it in Toyota DIY, go to the air cleaner section, and it'll give you the part number for the mass airflow sensor that matches your ECU. Okay, right, so that's that section. Then we're going to run down along here. And at the bottom, it's going to break out into 3 sections. So again, 2 of these we've added in, and that being the alternator plug. So hopefully you can see that there. 3-pin connector that goes directly into there. We then have our low oil level sensor. So again, with an LS400, you've got a front sump. So the low oil level sensor is right situated about here, which is why obviously this breaks out and goes down to the bottom there. And then lastly, we have the Lambda sensor for bank 2. So that goes down there, okay? So again, with this one, unlike the 3UZ, the 2 Lambda sensors are exactly the same. They're both the short, what I call the short harness. The 3UZ has a long harness on this side and a short harness on the other side. The 1UZ has short harnesses on both sides, which is why this harness is so long here to reach that particular one. Okay, right, so that's basically the entire harness, how it's laid out. It's really, really simple. It just makes a U shape. Normally just drop it on the top of the engine, start bolting the plastics down, and then plugging everything from there. All right, so things that you need to connect otherwise on the vehicle is really simple and straightforward. Number 1, you have your main alternator power. So that bolts onto your alternator there. In this case, I will check, but the customer did provide the harness that went under the LS400. So I've removed his main alternator cable. So that should be long enough to reach underneath the engine, pop out the other side, and do exactly what I've done here, which is pop directly into there and then bolt to your alternator point over there. Now, the reason you bolt your alternator to here is because the 120 amp fuse, if you can see that there, then you can see it if I go in there you go. 120 amp fuse, that protects the alternator wiring if the alternator wiring shorts out. Now, remember, because you're going down under the engine and so on, there's a lot of places for it to get caught, to rub through and short out onto the chassis. So that's why I always connect the alternator to here, because if that were to happen, the fuse would pop, nothing gets burnt, you just fix the wire, replace your fuse, and you drive off again with no major incidents. So again, please make sure you do connect that there. Secondly is your earths. So you have a terminal in your battery here. This is the earth terminal. It goes down underneath the battery, bolts to the chassis. So that is the earth for the entire chassis of the vehicle. Then it goes down and then you bolt it to the block of the engine. So remember, the starter motor is bolted to the block. So this main earth that comes from the battery negative goes down and bolts to the block. So that's your main earth there. Then what I normally say to people to do is, if you take a look at the firewall here, there's normally a brake pipe, a vacuum pipe that goes all the way along. And effectively what you then would do is halfway along there's an earthing point. So on your original 1G engine, it went from the this side of the cylinder head and had a little sort of like an earth braid or a wire with 2 rings on it, and it bolted on there. So you can take that off your IS200 engine and you can bolt it to the cylinder head over there and to the firewall over there. Doesn't hurt it to have that earth on there. And then lastly, when you took your IS200 out, you would have noticed that there's usually an earth braid coming from one of the gearbox bolts to the chassis leg. So those are the 3 earths that I would reattach if it was me personally, okay? If you find that your original IS200 cable is pretty shoddy, obviously you can replace it. It is a little bit difficult because it's got a mounting point halfway through the cable, but there's nothing stopping you from taking this one to the chassis and then bolting from the chassis a new cable to the engine block as well, okay? Right, so that is pretty much it. The rest is all mechanical, obviously connecting up the fuel and so on and so forth. And what's nice about these is they use the same deadhead system that the IS200 use. If you have never replaced your fuel pump, might be worthwhile that this is a good time to do so. But basically you take the fuel line that's existing from there and you connect it directly up to the engine. All the fuel pressure regulation is taken care of inside the fuel tank. So you don't have to stress about that at all. It's really super simple. One fuel line connected up, engine bolted in, harness dropped in, plugged in, and turn the key, ready to go. Okay. Right, so what I need to do now is crack on and let's get on to the testing of the engine harness. Right, so we're back now for the testing of the engine harness, and as I said before, it's going to be made up of 2 sections, one with the ignition on and one with the engine actually running. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all the tests that we are going to carry out, explain what they are and why we do them, and then we'll jump into the testing with the ignition on. Okay, so first thing we're going to test is the immobilizer. So in this case, we have removed the immobilizer, so we'll make sure that the immobilizer is removed, and I'll show you that by putting the key in the ignition barrel. Once we turn the ignition on, then we're going to look for the ambient temperature. So that's the outside temperature. It's going to appear on this climate control cluster here. And in this case, the sensor is actually connected to the 1UZ ECU. So it will actually go up and down as the outside temperature changes. Then we're going to come back to the cluster over here and we're going to look at the check engine light, the charge light, alternator light, and the oil pressure light as well. Okay. Let's bring this closer over here. Right, once we've done that, then we're going to look at the reverse and the speedo. So that's what I bought this over here. So what I've got is a little plug that I'm going to plug into the reverse here. That's going to then cause the cluster to beep. That basically tells me that all the wiring from here into the vehicle and into the side here is correct. And so if that beeps, then the reverse lights are going to come on. So we know that works 100%. For the speedo, what I'm going to do is use my little device here that outputs a speed signal. I'm going to plug it into the speed sensor plug, and you're going to see the speedo on the dash shoot up. That's going to tell me that that is working correctly. And just while I'm here, guys, when you get the everything to you and the speedo doesn't work, a quick little easy test to figure out whether it's the wiring or the sensor or the gearbox itself is if you've got a buddy around, you can jump in the car, put the ignition on, unbolt the speed sensor from the gearbox, just tape it to a drill with whatever tape you have around. Use a drill to spin that with the ignition on. If the speedo then goes up, then you know the wiring and the speed sensor is okay, and the problem is then in the gearbox because it's not spinning. Okay, so that's just a quick, easy way to determine where the issue lies. All right. Right, so that's the speedo. Then OBD2 test. So what we're going to do is use GTS to just connect to the ECU so you can see that it is talking to it. We have live data and everything is working. Now in this case, because it's a plug and play, we've plugged directly into the OBD2 port that's inside the vehicle. So there's nothing fancy or funny. Basically, you do it exactly as you would when it was an IS200. You can plug in TechStream. You could take it to a Lexus dealership. They can plug in, access the ECU, do diagnostics, and get everything working for you. Okay. Then we're going to do fuel pump relay. So in this case, the fuel pump is being controlled via the engine ECU. Now in the description below, I have a really nice video explaining how the fuel pump system works. When I get to the test, you'll see why that's important. But yeah, if you want to know how fuel pump systems work on a Lexus IS200 or a 1UZ VVT-i or a 3UZ, etc., go watch that video. It's a really good explanation because what I tend to find is people, sometimes when they do these conversions, they think that when they put the key on, the fuel pump primes, but in a Toyota Lexus, it doesn't do that. So they get a little bit confused. They haven't noticed that the IS200 is never primed from when they've had it. It's just that when they do the conversion, these sort of things come to mind and they sort of think, oh, there's something wrong. It's not priming the fuel pump. But that video explains it all in great detail. Next up is the AC clutch. So again, we're going to pop back to over here and we're going to activate the AC clutch the same way we've activated the fuel pump via the ECU when we do the test. That's just to make sure that it is actually working and it's turning on the AC magnetic clutch relay. Then AC request, what we're going to basically do is come over here, press the AC button. We're going to look at the live data on the GTS, and it'll tell us that the AC signal or request has gone from off to on. We'll press the button again and it'll go from on to off. That's just telling us that that MPX converter device is working correctly, because the MPX signal, AC signal from the car, is transmitted via MPX data to the 1UZ ECU to tell that when to activate the aircon. So again, the aircon pump itself is controlled by the engine ECU. The car only tells the engine ECU that you want AC, and then if all other parameters are met, then it will activate the AC. So just remember, with the air conditioning, you need to have everything plumbed in, you need to have all the sensors. It has to be completely standard for the AC to work. Okay, so that is the ignition on testing. So obviously the engine's not running, we just put the ignition on and we're going through those tests. Then we're going to start the engine, and the first test we're looking for is really straightforward. It's just the starter circuit. And what I mean by that is when I put the key in and I turn to the start position, the engine should crank over. If it does that, all the wiring is correct and working as it should do. ACIS, obviously we went through that as part of the layout, but what we're going to be looking for in here is going to be this little valve going from here to there. That's all we want to do. It should do it a few seconds after you actually start the engine. Quick tip, which I didn't mention before, is when you are taking off the intake to install the harness that goes underneath. Now, in this particular customer's case, that's already in the car, but if you are pulling it all off to install that harness underneath, check that vacuum solenoid valve, okay? And it's really, really easy to check. If you take a look at this connector here, you'll see a white wire, that's 12 volts, and you'll see this blue with a white wire, that is ground, okay? So in this case, if you translate it over, it's the black wire there and the white wire there. Now again, wire colors can change, but position doesn't change, okay? So don't assume that my colors here will match yours on your engine harness. But obviously with this being your actual engine harness, you know that the white one is 12 volts and the blue one is ground. The reason I say that is because the vacuum solenoid valves are polarity sensitive. But while you've got the intake off, it's just underneath the intake attached to a black canister. You can basically supply 12 volts and ground. If the solenoid clicks, then you know it works and you're happy to put everything back. But if it doesn't click, time to replace it while you've already got the intake off, because the last thing you want to do is put everything in together, start the engine up, that valve doesn't go down, then you have to pull the whole intake off again to get access to that, to swap out the vacuum solenoid valve. Right, drive-by-wire test. Well, that's really, really simple and straightforward. We're literally just going to rev it. I'm not going to go all the way, because basically, as I said before, once you get to here, it's a manual override. So what I want to do is I want to see if it revs just doing that, okay? That tells me the drive-by-wire is working. You could also usually hear a hum. You might hear the hum in the background while I'm doing the ignition on test. That's the throttle working. Then oil control valve test. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into GTS, go into active test, and I'm going to test each oil control valve. So what you'll hear is you hear the engine be idling. It'll go very lumpy. And then when I go off the test, it'll go back to idling smooth. And then I'll do the second bank and the same thing will happen. Okay. Injectors and coils. So basically what I'm going to do with this, just to make sure that every single cylinder is firing. Again, you should hear it running nice and smoothly. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to unplug each injector one by one. So I haven't actually clipped these all in, they're just resting on there. I'm going to unplug one by one and you'll see the cylinder misfire, and then I'll plug it back in again and it'll stop misfiring. It's showing me that every single cylinder is firing exactly as it should. Tachometer, rev counter, whatever you want to call it. So basically we're going to come back here and we should see the rev counter working up. You might catch a glimpse obviously when I start the car, but we'll come back and make sure that works correctly. Coolant temp, obviously we test this because it's part of the MPX data. So again, our MPX converter is making sure that the coolant temperature works. So ideally what I normally try and do is make sure that the coolant temperature is not at running temperature, just below or sort of halfway below, or sometimes just after the needle. And once we've done all the testing, that's why I leave it till the end, then we should see that temperature go up, and therefore you can see that it's actually reading correctly and the temperature needle is going up as the temperature goes up. Then lastly, diagnostics. We'll go through exactly what we can and can't do, and hints and tips about doing diagnostics on this engine. So without further ado, let's jump into the testing with the ignition on. All right. So again, I have removed the immobilizer from the ECU, so there is no actual immobilizer, but I have wired it up so that it looks like there is one to a passerby walking past the vehicle. So you can see at the moment, with the key out the ignition barrel, we've got our security light flashing. Now, if you've seen any of our other videos, I've explained this a million times, but basically what happens is the actual ECU will power up and look for the key the second you insert it. So what I'm going to show you now is, I'm hopefully going to get both in screenshot there. I'm just going to insert the key. You may have heard the relay in the fuse box click, but you can see the security light now has stopped flashing. So what happens is when I insert the key, there's a wire that comes from here, goes to the ECU, tells the ECU that the key's been inserted. It activates the main EFI relay, which then supplies power to the antenna, which is here, which then reads the chip inside the key, and then it goes from there. So that's how a standard system works. Obviously, I've removed the immobilizer, but it goes through the same process. Okay, so we can see the immobilizer is removed. That's fantastic. So let's put the ignition on, and we want to go over and we want to check the ambient temperature. So you can see 13 degrees out there. Fantastic. So again, that will go up and down as the temperature goes up and down. Right, so that is ambient temperature. Let's go look at check engine light. So we've got check engine light, we've got battery light, and we've got oil light on there. Okay, while we're busy on the dash as well, the low oil level light, which is the orange one, that will work. Again, I have put the connector on there for you guys, so don't worry, that will work. The only thing that won't work on here is the TRC bulb, okay? So the TRC bulb, I think it's in the bottom corner over here. You do need to remove that bulb, otherwise it's just gonna consistently flash, okay? So the 1UZ VVT-i and the LS400 didn't have TRC like an IS200. It had VSC, so there's a whole bunch of sensors there in a completely different system. So obviously we can't get them to talk to each other. So TRC is not activated on this particular engine harness. All right, so that's why you remove the bulb. Otherwise it's gonna keep flashing and it's gonna annoy the hell out of you, okay? Right, so now that that's done, let's go ahead and do reverse. So as I said, I've got a little plug here. And what I'm gonna do is basically plug this in here. There you go, you can hear that beeping over there. So fantastic. So I know all the wiring for the reverse light switch is perfect from the connector all the way inside the vehicle. Right, so now we're gonna do speedo sensor, okay? So I'm gonna try and do this single-handedly, but basically I've gotta hold this little button down here and plug this in, so just bear with me a second. Not so easy doing it single-handedly. Oh, I don't want it to go that far in. And there you go, you can see there the speedo has gone all the way up. So again, it's just outputting a signal there. And as I unplug it, there you go. You can see that that is now obviously working 110%. Okay, that's your speedo OBD2 test. So again, we're on GTS already. Let's go into the testing frame and we can see the engine's currently at 34 degrees, air temp 16 degrees, and all these other signals are working there as well. Right, so fuel pump relay. So now we're going to go into active test. And you'll see it says fuel pump relay and fuel pump. If you watch my video about fuel pumps, you'll know what the fuel pump relay actually is. And it's got nothing to do with actually turning on the fuel pump. But give me a second, I'm going to hit that on. Hopefully you heard that, but you can hear the fuel pump running there. So that is spot on, exactly what we want to see. So the ECU is controlling the fuel pump. So next up is going to be AC magnetic clutch relay. And again, same thing. I'm just going to have to move the camera over this so you can hear the relay clicking. Right, fantastic. Okay, so again, all the wiring from the ECU to the AC magnetic clutch relay is 100% and that is working. Right, so next up we want to do AC requests. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into data list. Let's narrow it down. And you'll see there we've got AC signal is currently on off. We're going to flick the AC button. That's going to go to on. We're going to flick that back off again. And now it's gone to off. Fantastic, exactly what we want to happen. Right, okay. Right, so that's all the testing with the ignition on. So I'm gonna quickly get my ear defenders and everything, get ready, pop back in a second, and we'll do the test with the engine running. See you in a second. Right, so back again for the engine running test, and I'm just gonna do a very quick recap of what we're gonna do. So first of all is start a circuit, turn the key, make sure the engine starts. ACIS, make sure that valve goes down. Drive-by-wire, go rev the engine. Oil control valve we're gonna do on here. Injectors and coils, I'm going to go and remove all injectors and coils one by one. Tacho, we'll come back to the cluster, make sure the tacho is working. And the coolant temperature, so at the moment you can see there, it's actually sitting on the needle. It'll only start rising above sort of 40 degrees, so we're at 33, so hopefully we'll get above sort of 40, 45 to 50 degrees by the time we do the rest of the test. Okay, so without further ado, let's pop over. Fantastic, okay. valve test. So let's go into active test. Then we'll do bank 1 first. Quickly. Right, okay, so diagnostics. You could see on the cluster there that we had no check engine light on there. So again, that is exactly how it is supposed to be, okay? When you're running this engine, because it's plug and play, there should be absolutely no codes whatsoever that cause the check engine light to come on. Now then, because it's a 1UZ VVT-i from Europe, there are going to be some codes, which I'm going to go through with you now, and these you should always have on your ECU. But luckily, they don't affect performance and they don't cause a check engine light. So let's pop into those two there, okay? So the codes we're going to be looking at are going to be basically the heater circuit for bank 1 and bank 2 sensor 2 of the Lambda, so the ones that went after the catalytic converters. Obviously, they're not connected, but again, with the European, and I do need to stress this, the European 1UZ VVT-Is, they do not cause a check engine light. American ones, unfortunately, yes, they will cause a check engine light, so they do need to be taken care of, okay? So that's their P0141 and P0161. So oxygen sensor heater circuit, bank 1 sensor 2 and bank 2 sensor 2, okay? Now then, these are 3 gearbox codes left over, and again, only on the European ones. These do not need to be gotten rid of because they do not cause a check engine light. They also do not affect performance. And again, I must stress, the American guys with your 1UZ VVT-Is, these will cause a check engine light, so they do need to be taken care of. So the Atomute takes care of all the codes that are relevant to make the engine run, ECU run correctly. These ones are normally taken care of via a 3 big resistors, but because the European ones, it doesn't cause a check engine light, or it doesn't cause in either model a problem with the engine running. It's just you have to do it on the American ones because the check engine light will constantly be on, so you would never know when there was an actual problem. Okay, right. Also, with the European 1UZ VVT-Is, we do have the luxury of being able to do what I call old school diagnostics, okay? So for my case, I have actually bought one of these. I think it was like 5 to 10 quid off of eBay. I've basically soldered the 2 terminals together, which is effectively pin 13 and 4 and 5. So 4 and 5 are a ground, 13 is TC. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna have to unplug from the laptop here. But what I'm going to do quickly to show you guys is you can use a paper clip to do this. You don't have to do that. I just made a nice tool so I can do it single-handedly without having to get a whole paper clip in. Hopefully you can see that. But as I do that, you'll start to see now that we're going to get a bunch of flashing codes. So we've got 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 27. That's the first Lambda code for the secondary Lambdas. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 29. That's the other Lambda sensor code. 27, 29. You'll see a long pause now, and it'll go 1, 2, pause. So basically the only codes that come up there are going to be the 27 and the 29, and that's related to the 2 Lambda sensor codes that you saw on this one here, P0141, P0161. The auto gearbox codes don't actually come up with this type of diagnostic, so you don't have to worry about that at all. Right, I'm just going to unplug that because it makes the throttle make a funny noise. Put that back over there. Now then, depending on where your IS200 is, either of those have the diagnostic port in the driver's footwell. So both versions, either the 98 2001, they have that OBD2 port. Now, if you have an earlier model, which is I think a 98 01, you also have this diagnostics port in the front here. You can do exactly the same thing, because if you take a look here, we've got E1, which is that terminal over there, that's a ground. And you can see there we've got TC, and it's that terminal over there. So you could put a wire in there, and you will achieve exactly the same setup. You'll put the ECU into diagnostic mode, okay? Right, so you can read codes like that, which is brilliant if you're in a pickle and you haven't got access to an OBD2 code reader like GTS TechStream or one of those Bluetooth ones. But it also does something which is quite cool as well. When you put the ECU into diagnostic mode, what it'll actually do is it'll lock the timing at 10 degrees, okay? So if you take a look here, I've marked it on the crank pulley there, and you've got 0, 5, 10, and 15 degrees. So if you ever do a timing belt change and you think that the timing may be slightly off, what you can do is you can bridge those 2 terminals, start the engine up, get a timing light. Now again, with a timing light, it can be weird with these coil on plug engines. My timing light, I can just wrap the clamp around the wires, and that's good enough for it to work. Not all timing lights are like that. So again, sometimes you have to take the coil out, get an old-fashioned spark plug lead like you would have on, a 1UZ non-VVT-i or a 2JZ, and you plug it into the coil, and you plug the other end into the spark plug, and then you put your timing light clamp around there. But when you start the engine, it'll lock the timing at 10 degrees, so you can check it with a timing light. So before you go ahead and strip everything down, you can tell straight away whether or not your timing is out, okay? If you're not at 10 degrees, say you're at 12 or whatever, then obviously you can then start pulling all the covers off and checking the physical markers on the engine for the timing, okay? Right, so that brings me on to my next point, which is obviously don't leave a wire connected and carry on driving the vehicle because you lock the timing at 10 degrees. It is not going to be fun to obviously drive around with the engine locked at 10 degrees. Okay. Right, so I think that's pretty much it, guys. Hopefully that does a lot of explanation for especially the people installing these harnesses. We've gone through the layout so you know where everything plugs in. We've gone through the testing so you can see everything works correctly. And obviously let's get this off now and get it off to the customer so he can get it in his car and get it running. But if you have any questions, guys, please feel free to ask below. I try and do videos if you guys ask questions that I can then do a video, but I keep them short and separate from actual harness videos because these can be anything from 40 to an hour and 10 minutes long. So I don't want to put some useful information in the middle of a 40 to 50 minute video. So if I do little videos like that, you'll basically see that in a much smaller, concise video just explaining that particular problem. But other than that, thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you again later. Bye-bye.